Welcome to Dark Communion. The Mound of Blackwater by A. Hawk Mayer. I write this as a warning to those who would venture to follow in what I've done, likely local law enforcement, or perhaps a curious individual who happened upon our quaint little town, or maybe some poor soul who was unlucky enough to discover this horrible secret. No matter the background, I tell you this as a deterrent. Some secrets were meant to be kept. Some mysteries were never meant to be solved. Some questions should never be answered. There are horrors that have existed here when the world was in its infancy, and will remain here long after we're gone and the earth becomes barren and desolate. And within that Acherontic underbelly, I was shown a glimpse of one such eldritch terror, and I feel that I shall not live to see another. I feel it calling to me from that abandoned chasm in which it lies. We are all told paranormal stories in our youth. The abandoned house that is inhabited by an angry spirit that will follow individuals to their homes, a shadow that possesses children, driving them to madness, causing them to slaughter their loved ones, a shapeless beast that stalks the forest, waiting for hapless youth to happen upon its hunting grounds, the thing with pale glowing eyes that will whisper the secrets of elder things into the minds of those foolish enough to listen. With age comes wisdom, and the knowledge that these stories are just the imaginations of children who wish to make light of what frightens them. As a child, I heard stories of a monster who lurks in the sewers. Some said it was a giant man-eating rat, others said it was a mutant vagrant who feeds on anything that sets foot in his home. I believed it to be just that, a story. With time, the tales of malevolent shadows and other nameless things of the world faded from my memory, lurking within the dark and forgotten corners of my mind. On the day that started these weird events, my daughter and her friends were out in the woods when they happened upon the mound. This protrusion was well known around town as cursed. Anyone who dared climb to the top would face a terrible fate. Pure superstition. I had seen several of my townsfolk, one of whom is currently the mayor, venture up the aforementioned protrusion of the earth and survive with little to no tragedy befalling them. My daughter had been dared to go to the top of the accursed mound and stay there for a certain time. She reluctantly accepted, not wanting to be seen as a coward, and made her way up. Once she reached the top, she found a strange idol, half buried in the ground. The thing unsettled her slightly, but she could not bring herself to put it back as if drawn to it. She came home some time after asking me if I recognized it. I picked it up and studied it. It was a large object, faded green in color and sticky with some sort of odorless, viscous liquid. It seemed to be made of some sort of dyed clay with intricate designs carved into it. It was difficult to tell what the sculptor was trying to depict. It appeared to be some sort of mass of skin, smooth in some places and rough in the others. Jagged mouths with pointed teeth and round balls strewn all over it. It was an ugly depiction of some unknown deity. At first glance, one could easily mistake it for a wet lump of clay lazily placed upon a circular base. While I ran my fingers over its surface, I noticed an inscription on said base, which showed a jumble of letters made to form words never heard nor uttered by the modern man. Azir Nari Elder Boldul Ni Buri Dir Yugi Saidir Though atavistic in appearance, I dismissed this object as nothing more than a childish prank, likely made by creative and mischievous youth, though no such individual came to mind. I let my daughter know that I believed it to be nothing more than a faux statue, made to frighten others, which seemed to have alleviated her ease. I then placed the object in the top drawer of my nightstand. I awoke in the middle of the night with a sense of unease, the hazy fog of an unremembered dream still clouding my sleep-addled mind. I looked at the electronic clock that I keep on my nightstand. It showed 12:51. I rubbed my tired eyes and turned over, hoping that the rest of my sleep would go uninterrupted. However, as I lay there, I could hear what sounded like a faint hissing from the direction which I had been facing. I thought nothing of it. It was likely my daughter speaking to her friends on the phone. I went back to my attempt at sleep until I could distinguish one word from the hushed hissing. I immediately jumped out of bed and onto my feet, searching for the origin of that muted whisper, intently listening for hints at its direction. The sound seemed to have vanished without a trace, as I could only hear the muffled sounds of the outside world. Perhaps I had imagined it. Like listening to a song being sung in a foreign tongue, my brain had likely made an attempt to fill in the blanks and came up with a word that closely matched what was being said. This explanation unfortunately did not settle the unease within my mind, thus causing me to lie awake in the rest of the night, contemplating, staring out the window into the darkened world. At around 7 in the morning, I decided to investigate the queer idol, hoping to find its maker and owner. I thought the best place to start would be with the mayor in our small town. Surely he is likely to know enough about the people to be able to find the culprit and return the object to them. Some small part of me hoped that I could soon part with the item, never to see it again. I had called him, asking if he could come visit me, stating that I had found something of interest and would like to discuss it with him. He, being a close friend of mine, obliged and made his way over as soon as he could. It was nearly afternoon when I heard a knock at my door. I opened it, expecting to see the mayor, but instead found one of the local youths, my daughter's close friend. She had come to see if she was here. I informed her that she might still be asleep, but that I would fetch her from her room. I walked to the other side of the house to where her room was located and opened the door to find her empty room. I found it strange for her to be out of the house at this hour, but brushed it off as her meeting with her other friends. I informed the young girl of this. A confused look briefly crossed her face, but she informed me that she had an idea of where she was. As she was departing, the mayor just arrived, getting out of his car and greeted the youth, who quietly greeted him back. We both sat down in the dining room across from each other. He studied me briefly, likely noticing my lack of sleep, and gave a worried look. At this point, I had almost forgotten the reason for his visit, but I quickly gathered my thoughts and brought out the figurine and handed it to him. He observed it for a while, blankly staring at the features, feeling it intently. He told me that it was well made, but clearly a fake, something from which I had already deduced. I told him the story of how it came to be in my possession, about the group of children coming across the famous mound of Blackwater, and my daughter being goaded into climbing it, and how she found it at the top, half buried in the ground. His eyes widened slightly at the mention of my daughter and the mound, staring at the thing as if suddenly coming to a terrible realization. He then looked up at me, smiling his signature smile. But his eyes were empty, void of emotion, He said that he would look into who made it, as if continuing his previous thought, and handed me the idol. I tried telling him that he should keep it, but he refused, stating that he loses things too easily and that it would be best left with me for safekeeping. I reluctantly agreed and received it, somehow feeling colder and more sinister. Some time after the mayor's departure, I still felt uneasy. In the years I've known him, I've been able to ascertain his thoughts through slight facial movements. He was obviously lying about his ignorance of the unnerving item, but why? Why would he lie about such a trivial item? Perhaps it was of his making, for me? I had to investigate this conspiracy for myself. Mayhaps I would find some clues at the Forbidden Mound. I was uncertain of how long I would be away from home, so I felt that I had to do the household chores at once, as well as prepare meals for my daughter's eventual return. By the time I was ready to depart, it was late in the evening. I didn't care. I needed to be rid of this burden. I took nothing but my phone and a strong flashlight and set out to the mound first, as this was my only lead. By the time I had arrived at the area, the sun had nearly disappeared behind the peaks of the mountains, darkening my surroundings and forcing me to make use of my flashlight. I could see the faint outline of the taboo protrusion. My pace began to quicken as I wanted to leave this place as quickly as possible. The dead trees, shadowed in the darkness, seemed to leer at me, beckoning me towards the heap. As my flashlight reached the tip of the mound, a rush of horror befell me. My daughter was at the top, facing away from me with her arms outstretched towards the Stygian space that lay before her, luring her into its embrace. I ran up the mound as fast as my body would allow, each footfall seeming to last an eternity. Once I had reached the peak, I instinctively threw my arms forward, attempting to grab my daughter and pull her towards the safety of my light, though I did not understand the reasoning behind this action. My arms met nothing but the cold night air, and my chest met the earth, sending the air in my lungs out into the night. I desperately looked around the area, hoping to find where she had gone, but there was no sign of her. I slowly got back on my feet, still scanning the area, hoping to find something I initially missed, but there was still nothing. At this moment, I realized there truly was nothing. No wind, no movement, no sound. Just abject, dispiriting nothingness surrounding me. That's when I heard it. That foul hissing from that restless night, though now it was audible. I could distinctly hear the disembodied voice all changing in unison. I searched for the origin of the eldritch intonation, only to find that it came from the idol that I held in my left hand. Upon seeing it, images began to flash in my mind, like a streak of lightning tearing across the night sky. Images of the idol, of screaming faces and bleeding flesh. It was relentless. I couldn't escape from this terrifying episode. I sank back to the ground, arms tightly wrapped around my head. All I wanted at this time was for this to end. I then began to hear another sound beginning to overshadow the incessant mantra. It sounded like the lullaby of a mother to her child, though she was not speaking any language ever heard by any living being. The words invaded my fracturing mind, pounding at the walls of my sanity like a ceaseless invader. I began to scream, but all I could hear was her. I could see a long, dark tunnel leading to a horrible crimson light that pulsated with the rhythm of the song. I had to get out. The putrid stench and the claustrophobic darkness were choking me. I began to claw at the walls, praying I could find a way out. The light became brighter and brighter until my vision was red. I began to wail, begging for an escape. I jumped out of my bed and fell to the floor. Still howling for my life, I wouldn't stop until I saw the daylight surrounding me. I could see that I was back in my bedroom. My mind raced with images of what I had just witnessed. Was it all a dream? Some nightmare caused by my sleep-deprived mind and fear of that accursed item? I slowly pushed myself up, hoping not to disturb the peace which I had thought would send me back into that unmentionable hell. Once I steadied myself, I was able to determine that I was indeed awake. I could have sworn that I had not gone to sleep that night. The last thing I remembered was my daughter. The realization dawned upon me. My daughter. I sprinted to her room to once again find it empty. I instinctively began fabricating excuses for this. She was staying with a friend. She had left before I awoke. She was elsewhere in the house. I searched every corner of my abode to find it completely void of life. I started to think of places she could be when the remembered vision of that dark, dank tunnel quickly flashed in my mind. No, she couldn't be there, anywhere but there. Even if she was in that unnatural place, where would that be? The faint stench tickled my nose. It was the sewer. I dismissed it as soon as I thought of it. Why would she be down there, of all places? Another thought manifested itself, accompanied by another memory of that night before. Who was she reaching out to in that cold and monstrous dark night? The faint sound of a singing echoed from the shadowy, forgotten depths of my mind. That story, the thing in the sewer, it couldn't be true. They were just myths, silly stories told by scared children. This is all a joke, yes, this was all a practical joke. I would go down there and she would be there, laughing with the mayor and her mischievous friends at how I had fell for such a silly story. But what if it was real? What if she was trapped down there with her? Would I risk the safety of my daughter for a choice that could be made with the flip of a coin? No, I must go. Even if this is all a practical joke at my expense, I must traverse that unlighted underbelly. I ran as fast as my legs could manage to the nearest entrance to that festering culvert. The only place I could think of in my panic state was the manhole near the center of town, a place I had frequented in my youth. I arrived shortly thereafter and ripped the cover from the ground, tossing it aside. I hesitated for a moment, looking down into that infinite black abyss. I once again heard the faint singing, which hardened my resolve. I flew down the ladder and landed hard on the concrete below. At that moment, I realized I had forgotten my flashlight, so I had to make do with the built-in light on my phone. Though I felt it was unneeded, I could see that ghastly crimson light at the end of the tunnel once more. I unhurriedly made my way down the inky tunnel, moving closer and closer to that horrid light which seemed to grow larger. By the time I had reached the left turn from where the light was emanating, the red had overtaken me, smothering me with hostility. I had to build up courage to round the corner, for I did not know what lay beyond. I pushed myself forward to find myself gazing upon a horrifying and revolting sight. They were wrong. The urban myths of that thing that lies within this tenebrous cesspool were false. This thing wasn't a monster, not in the slightest. It was far beyond monstrous. It was wholly unnatural and hideous. The mere sight of the thing was enough to bring me to my knees. This amalgamation of flesh that lives, bleeding and pulsating on its dark throne of rock and sludge. She began to sing to me that terrible lullaby. She began to burn memories into my broken mind. She had been here when the earth had not yet cooled, but that was not her origin. She showed me the black void beyond the stars, the realm of dead and forgotten gods, dreaming in their beds of emptiness. Among the singing and whispering and forbidden tongues, I could hear another voice. A voice I recognized. The mayor. I could see him in my mind. He spoke through a closed mouth. She is our flesh and our blood. She had birthed the flesh of the universe and cradled our infant existence. She sang us to sleep, plunging us into the murkiness of ignorance, and in that sleep, she hopes to beckon us back home, back to her loving embrace, to be made one with the mound. That accursed mound is a beacon, forcing anyone who climbs it into her fold. He knew, that bastard knew what that thing was, and he knew I would venture down to this gruesome place. I screamed at her, telling her to return my daughter to me. The singing grew louder, and she showed my sleeping daughter in the comfort of another home. I had been tricked by the maker of that idol, this mischievous thing. I fell to my knees and cried. There was no escape from the mother. I am now one of her cherished children. I write this as a deterrent. Don't come looking for answers. Don't come looking for me. I have burned everything pertaining to that abomination so as to leave little chance of a poor fool making the mistakes I have made. I will leave this as a note in a metal box, half buried at the top of that damned mound, in hopes that I can stop this thing from claiming more of its offspring, stopping her from beckoning them back home. For the love of all that you hold dear, I pray that you stay away from the mound of Blackwater. This has been a Dark Communion recording. Thank you for listening. Dark Communion is a podcast platform for young writers to publish their best short horror stories. At Dark Communion, the story doesn't end with the podcast. Every story published is vetted as a short or feature film prospect. If you've written something that you think could be made into a film, submit it to the Dark Communion Reddit page.